Before we start the show, I want to thank and recognize our sponsor, Christy McCullough, and her Mobile, Alabama firm, Empowered Family Law, empowering families to navigate difficult changes and create new beginnings. Our guests have the big issues. I mean, they certainly do. But it translates into your daily life. You don't have to have this horrible thing happen or this huge event happen to get something out of the show. Tough times don't last. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, because that's what going through adversity is. You go through some tough times, and when you come out the other side, you're a stronger person. Hey everyone, this is Rod Cate, and welcome to this week's episode of Rocket Motivation. This is our 60th episode and the last episode of Season 5. My special guest today is my producer Johnny Gwin of Deep Fried Studios, and we're going to talk about the Rocket Motivation podcast journey we've been on and where we're headed. We're going to talk about some of our past guests and their stories, which make Rocket Motivation Podcast what it is. So here we go. Okay, so Johnny Gwin, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Glad to be here, Rod. I'm always happy to be in front of the mic because I never get the chance to be in front of my own microphones. So thank you.
Like I said, this is our 60th episode, and it's always been me in here with the guest or on Zoom, and Johnny's been on the other side of the glass making it all happen. And so it is a pleasure to have you here on the mic with me.
Well, there's times when I'm here in the interview and I want to chime in. So now here's my chance to chime in all the chimes I want.
All right. Well, you got it. So this is where you take over the show, and you're going to interview me, and we're going to talk about Rocket Motivation.
Fantastic. I love the idea of this is the 60th episode, and congrats on 60 episodes. 50 is a milestone, but a lot of people quit after 50, so having 60 is a congratulations, Rod.
It's a nice round number, but 50 is like, half of 160 is round, but you're moving on. I mean,
correct.
You've passed 50, and now we're at 60, and there's no looking back.
That's right. And the first question is, did you expect when you first started to reach 60 episodes?
I never thought about it. I was just thinking about the next week's episode.
That's right. Because I say thinking 12, but you're going to commit to 12 episodes, and that's how we do it. Then we take a break and then restart. So you said, okay, I'll get through 12, and you agreed to that and paid me, which is the best thing I can do to anybody is pay up front, because that means you'll do it. What I'm hearing is that you said, well, I do one show, and then I was just thinking, what the heck am I doing for the next one?
Especially when it began, I was like, I don't know where I'm going to get these guests.
Right.
At the beginning, you think, all right, I can find some. But then, once it started, then people would contact me on Facebook. Correct. And say, hey, I think I got a story for you.
Yeah.
And
so it would be somebody else submitting somebody else's name, or somebody saying, here's my story?
Both. And so, when you start this and you're like, God, I don't know where I'm going to get guests. And then all of a sudden they kind of start coming. But then you start, I started doing some research. I mean, I would get on Instagram. I would get on social media or on the internet and just find people that might have, had some adversity that they've gone through.
So you're scouting out people that have these adversity stories, and they're out there who are advocating for these positive things that Rocket Motivation talks about.
Right. And at the beginning, though, it seemed like most of what I was looking for was this kind of, because of what I am, kind of a physical disabled.
Right.
That's what I was looking for, because that's what you can see when you look for stuff on social media.
That's the quickest thing to see. Oh, that's someone in a wheelchair. Oh, that's someone with a cane. Oh, that's someone that only has one arm. And that gets you looking at who is this person, what is their story, and then what are they advocating in their space now.
Right. And if they're doing that on social media, then you're thinking, all right, hopefully they'll want to come on the show to not only help the show, but then we can help what they're trying to do on social media.
So would you say the hardest part of the show has been finding guests? Is that the hardest part of the show?
Probably, but it has become not so difficult. It just seems that I find them.
Right.
I mean, they just come. There's times, and and I'm like Johnny, hell, I don't have anybody for next week. And then, but we always seem to find somebody. But yeah, it can be, especially when you've done 60 episodes, you don't want to repeat. And that's a problem.
That's where it gets tricky. And we talked about that. Look, at one point we noticed, and cancer is ubiquitous in all of our lives. We did have enough to where we're saying we've got a lot of cancer stories. And we're not belittling those stories, but can you agree that we had to break away from that? And we also said we've never even done a mental health show, I think, until the fourth season before we even did a mental health show.
No, we had Anne Marie Kahlberg.
That's right. Yeah.
She was in the second season.
Right.
I think it was. I found her on Instagram.
Yeah.
Because her handle was Babe with Bipolar.
Babe with Bipolar,
and
right.
so I just reached out to her, and she agreed to come on and was glad to do it.
Yeah. And we'll talk about this getting closer to the end of the show of like where we would like to go with Rocket Motivation going forward. But, we are definitely looking for more interesting stories of adversity comes in many flavors and many styles. And the idea is we're trying to find these different stories. But as I think you've noticed, there are sure a lot of commonalities between these people's stories.
Yeah, especially, hope comes out. Remember, especially with, I think, the addiction stories, it's going to get better. That was one. And then I think another one is, when you're trying to overcome adversity, the need for the reliance on your family and friends.
Right. Asking for help. And we noticed that in the first season, regardless of what the advice was, at some point, someone would say, you cannot do this on your own. You need to reach out and find people that have gone through this stuff that you're going through, or people that will be positive in your life, and not to be ashamed to ask for help. We noticed that early on as a commonality in a lot of these lessons.
Yeah, it was. Well, and this kind of goes with hope, but tough times don't last.
Yeah.
And we just heard this one fairly recently. It's almost a cliche because it's said so much, but it's what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what's going through adversity is. You go through some tough times, and when you come out the other side, you're a stronger person.
Well, what I hear a lot is the word grit. You've been dealt a poker hand one way or the other in life, and the people that we interview will be upset for a while, but they don't fold the cards. They play the hand they are given, and they try their best to make the best of what it is. And that, to me, is incredibly inspirational because, look, everybody has bad days, and I will tell you there's a day where something petty happens and I make a big deal out of it, and I either listen to an interview when you're recording it, or I'm editing a show of Rocket Motivation, and it puts me in perspective of, oh yeah, that little thing I had before, that was a petty issue. I will get over that in a second, while I'm listening to someone who went through a major life-changing event and how it has changed their lives and transformed their lives, and how a lot of times say I am not better off, but in a good place because I have done these things even after this tragedy. And that's been hugely motivating for me to hear that and know that grit is a big part of it.
Yeah. And a lot of them have said, I wouldn't change this.
I know. And yeah.
Which is, and I think about that and I'm like, well, is that just something people say? And I think with some of these guests, they actually mean it.
The series of things that happens in your life puts you at that moment in time. I think the saying I've heard is your past is perfect, even though nothing is perfect in life. But the idea is for you to be here sitting right now for what we're doing, all of these things, good or bad, had to happen. So your past is perfect, and you are here living and breathing and being able to make a better day, because you don't know what would happen because someone didn't have the accident in 1996 doesn't mean something worse couldn't have happened in 2011 or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And I even think about that with me. All right, so I break my neck playing high school football when I'm 15, then paralyzed from the neck down, then fortunate to be able to walk again. But if that hadn't happened, 2 years later, I may have been in a car wreck and killed.
Well, that's the thing. It's the great fortune cookie of life. Yeah. You have no idea what you're opening up at the time. But those stories are amazing. And the thing is, again, there's a lot of commonalities in our stories, as I've noticed, but everyone has a unique story. It shocks me when I hear, and I'll go, it's another cancer patient story, but it's not the same story. But everybody's individual details is what makes it interesting, and also what they had to do to overcome and what they had to do themselves personally to be able to rise above their situation.
Right. But one thing we do not have on this show, none of our guests have the victim mentality.
At all. Just the opposite. I'm almost waiting to hear someone say, don't come crying around me, because you're going to get a mouthful.
Yeah. Another commonality. Life is not fair. It's you play with the hand you're dealt. Life. No one asked for this to happen.
Yeah,
and it does. That bad things happen. But these guests, nobody folds up. I mean, if you fold up, you might. Sure, you're gonna get the why me, and you're gonna feel sorry for yourself. A day or so, or maybe even a month. But God, the way these guests they go after it. They're like, this happened. All right, so now what am I going to do? How am I going to get over this?
Right. And the lessons are great, but when you have the context of, we usually give anywhere between 10 minutes or maybe a little more to tell like the situation of how that wreck happened or how that diagnosis happened or what was the leading up to this thing. And I think you need to hear that context, because then you hear that person who they were before this happened and then the lessons and how they are now. It's not just the lessons I learned now. It is, but I was this before and now I am something like a butterfly transforming over time. And that to me is amazing because, again, I have been fortunate enough not to have one of these moments where the world pivoted in a microsecond to where everything went to like, I can't use my legs or can't. That's just so amazing to me to imagine, or just terrifying to me. But then to hear that story, it does reflect in my life, because we are all challenged on a daily basis with adversity and just different levels of it. And the idea is we are hearing an extreme level people's stories and the things they've done to overcome them, but those lessons and those things to overcome them also work for the small things as well.
Absolutely. Our guests have the big issues. They certainly do. But it translates into your daily life. And you don't have to have this horrible thing happen or this huge event happen to get something out of the show. I mean, that's what's so great about it. But like you said, these stories are just fascinating. And, I mean, the inspiration I get from listening to the stories, and then we get the advice, and this based upon where I've been. But it doesn't work without the story.
We could make a book of lessons. Like say we want to do a book of all of the guests we've had and the lessons we've learned on the show. If you didn't have the 4 or 5 paragraphs leading up to the lessons, it doesn't add the weight to it.
Right. I think they've already got one. I think it's just called Proverbs.
Or Job, the book of Job. Yeah. Which, I go back to, we do live in a world, and I've heard this on other shows that I produce, where we do live in a world where the currency is be a victim. Like in this day and age, it's okay to say, well, I'm this way because something made me this way, and you should feel sorry for me, and whatever comes from that. Well, I am hearing from other people, it's like you can have that mentality for a brief moment or for a while, but if you're going to thrive over time, that is not the mindset to have. You need to have a victor mentality, and that's what I've heard on every episode we've had.
Yeah. It's always the victor mentality. It's the I'm going to overcome.
And we've never prodded anyone for that message. No. It is just, and they haven't said it. Actually, we've had a couple people who said, wait a minute, if you're having a problem thinking you can't do something, you should look at what I've done, because if I can do it, then you darn sure can do it.
Yeah, but we hadn't had a lot of that.
No.
Most people just tell their story. I ask, basically the same group of questions. Once you get past the story, my questions are at least similar. To draw out what we want to draw out.
And that's called, for people for podcasting world, that's called foundational questions, meaning that way we can compare shows to shows, because we have 3 or 4 questions that always are asked.
Right. Like, because when I ask somebody, what have you learned about yourself from going through what you've been through? Probably 80% of the time, wow, that's a good question, because it makes them think, and that's what we want on the show. We don't want a mailed-in answer.
Right.
If you're coming on this show, you better be ready to talk about yourself, what you've learned, and give us some great advice.
Yeah.
We don't want we want transparency. We want people to dig deep, and when they dig deep, which 95% of them do, it just makes for a great show.
And also, you do the work that most shows don't do. You do a pre-interview, so you get a lay of the land and get to know the person a little bit better before you go live with the recording. I think that's important. Like I said, nobody in the other shows that I do a whole lot of that, and I think that creates for a much more organized interview by you, and also the guest has a good idea, not every question, but has a good idea of what's expected of them when they come on the show.
Yeah, and because when I do my pre-interviews, I don't hit them with the big questions in the pre-interview. All I really want's the factual stuff.
Give me the, just like an attorney, give me the facts and let me lay it out, and we can make sure we get through it in a timely manner.
Well, and another thing too, being a lawyer, and I've taken thousands and thousands of depositions over my career, that really helps when you're doing, you're talking to somebody in the pre-interview to get the facts, because you want to get what's important. But I tell you, deposition skills that are really good in being a podcaster is a lawyer who takes a good deposition listens to the answer. Mm-hmm. You don't just have it scripted out and then go to the next one, because that's where you listen to what they say, and that gives you your next question.
And that's what I tell hosts of podcasts is you need to have the questions in front of you, but you do not use it as a checklist, because there's going to be a comment that guest gives you that you did not prepare for, and you had better be listening, because they opened the door for a much more interesting conversation and a much more interesting question than the next one on the list. What amazes me is the guest says something spectacular, and they don't even know how spectacular it is. They think it's just some old whatever part of their story, and you're like, wait, what? You just said what? Go back and tell me that. And they just don't realize how amazing something was they just revealed.
Right. Yeah.
And that's so cool.
Yeah, that is when somebody just they're just talking, and all of a sudden you listen, it's like, wow.
Yeah, yes, I lost my shoulder and my arm, but I got over that. But my real problem is, and then whatever they say next, and you're like, wait, the missing your shoulder and your arm is the second worst thing that's happened, and that's when you go, oh yeah, wow, that is a pretty heroic human being right there.
Yeah, and that was Jana Rocker.
Yeah,
remember her
yeah,
episode?
And that wasn't a kidney issue.
Yeah.
And all she did was just glossed over her arm being amputated.
Yeah. As an aside, I don't have my left arm or shoulder. Let me tell you what's really wrong.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so Rod, let me we'll go back to some questions here. We have 60 episodes. There's a lot of moments. What are 2 or 3 moments that stand out in your mind from the past 5 seasons?
Well, I think first, and you and I have talked and laughed about this quite often, the episode with Derek Dalton, that's when I first learned.
That's like episode 2 or 3.
It was early in. Yeah. I learned that we have a 30-minute show, and I think we were about an hour in, and Derek and I were just still talking about his story.
Telling the once upon a time this bad thing happened.
Yeah. Of course, the thing is, Derek's story was so amazing that I think I was so interested in it, I lost complete track of time, because it was so interesting. But that show, for me, the main reason was, you got to get the story, you got to get it out quickly. But again, somebody's telling this incredibly important, powerful life story, and you can't cut them off. You can't say, you're right in the middle. You can't say, hey, Derek, man, this is a 30-minute show. You're gonna have to make this a lot quicker. But I have learned how now to get the story out in a quicker fashion based on my questions, instead of, okay, so tell us what happened. I lead it. It's like leading questions. I take them through, let them get at the important stuff out, and then we get to the advice and what I've learned, and I tell them that in the pre-interview that, look, it's 30 minutes. We're going to get through the fact stuff in 10, 15 tops, but because the show's all about, helping people. Mm-hmm. They want to, listen to people that have gone through adversity and see what they can, if it helps them in their life. And so that's what it's really about. And that's where you get all the good stuff. The good stuff comes in on, this is what I've learned. And
I agree. You having the conversation with them in the interview, but also as an editor, I take notice of what I cut, because I do have to cut very important things, not narrative. The narrative has to make sense, but I know I'm cutting someone's very important story for time, and it's hard to do, because I know that is, and probably it's the millionth time they've told it, but still it's important even to me. So we try to keep respect of that and making sure that we know that's important. But also I try to get to lessons learned by the 12th minute of the show. Yeah. I try my best. So.
Well, and I think another one was Sally Green in season 1, because I think Sally's was the first one that kind of blew up.
Right.
You know, had a lot of
and that
listens.
was she lost her husband
and son
the same day in a honey campfire. Yeah.
You know, I was good friends with her husband, and you know, I remember when all that happened, and it was just horrible.
Yeah, and I remembered the story once we heard it. Like I was actually up in a neighboring county the weekend that happened, and then I realized, and you know, wow, that really was a big story. And then to hear her on the other side was, you know, quite fascinating to hear, you know, how you make it through something like that.
And I don't know if that may have been the first live guest we had.
Possible.
Because we did, the first couple were Zoom.
Well, the very first one was you.
Was me.
Was your story.
Yeah, my story.
Yeah.
But then.
That's right. Zoom with the first two at least.
Yeah,
and then she might have been the first in studio. Yeah.
And it's so much more fun to have them here where they're sitting across the table from you. Because then you get kind of more into a conversation mode instead of a Q&A.
But I do love we can talk to people all over the country now.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked to people in other continents.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. We've had, you know, Christian Hadjipateris from Greece, and then we had the guest from Belgium too, and she was great.
We're worldwide.
We're international. We're national. We cover them all.
One more thing that has stood out that has surprised you, but with the seasons.
Well, I guess I am somewhat surprised that we are at 60 episodes. You take them one day at a time, and next thing you know, we're at 60 episodes. Yeah. And that's like when we started, you know, this conversation. It's like I never thought we'd be at 60, but I never even thought about it one way or the other. You know, you just keep going forward, and here we are. You know, surprising things. That's tough because I don't know what I'm that surprised about. Maybe the enthusiasm that the guests bring on the show to come in, and their willingness to tell the story, because there's a lot of private stuff.
Right.
Crystal Yarborough, who was sexually abused, throughout her childhood and her adolescent years, that became her job, was helping, you know, women who were sexually abused.
Yeah.
And to come on and be able to tell, you know, some of that very private stuff.
Right.
You know, of course, that's what makes the show so great.
And also that want to help others.
Yeah.
You know, if you know, I have this strong voice, and you know, it's still painful, but yet they say it with such conviction, and they're bold, and they're moving on with the things the silver linings that have come out of horrible things. That's the thing that always gets me, is someone found a new career, or someone found a new passion, or someone found a new purpose because this experience happened to them. Now that's what they do full time. I mean, how many guests have we had that now have their own foundation, or their own company, or they're consultants, or they're working the therapy world, or they've created a not-for-profit to deal with exactly what they've dealt with. To me, that is just an amazing that they, you know, happen to find this silver lining in this dark cloud.
Right. And like Carrie Bentley Benson, whose son is severely autistic. You know, she's kind of taken that and started with the, you know, she does the Dance Without Limits,
right?
Where special needs, even adults, they do their dance routines, and then they put on a production.
Awesome.
So she's taken that and made a career out of it.
And I have to bring up the great sponsors you've had. You've had people along the way that has made this show possible.
Yeah.
Gat Creek. We've had Christy McCullough.
Empowered Family Law.
Empowered Family Law.
Well, I tell you, Russ Copeland and Robert Hedge from Hedge Copeland Law Firm.
Yep.
Jason Darley's always thrown in some money, and Jason was a guest too, and his show was fantastic.
Stokes County
Arts Council, and my guy Eddie McGee from Stokes County, North Carolina.
And then
and
then we had a couple other businesses from North Carolina, where you're from.
Well, Brian Wheel, who is from North Carolina, but he's one of my friends down here. So Alliance Mechanical Solutions sponsored half of a season. So I can tell you this much: we wouldn't be at episode 60 if I didn't have sponsors.
Exactly.
I couldn't. You know, I just, as much as I love doing
and
this,
you love it, and I do. You love podcasting. Once you got doing it, and I have to warn people, because I saw you immediately. You loved the interview process, and I was like, Rod, you got to be careful, man. I've seen people, once they get podcasting, that's all they want to do, and you love it. You absolutely love podcasting.
Well, I do. Not only do I love being in the studio with the mic in my face and the earphones on and talking to guests, but it's what we do here. I mean, it's you know, it's getting the, you know, it's the helping people part of it. I mean, I get selfish about it because I get inspired. I get to get these incredible guests on that have gone through, I mean, I've gone through a lot in my life too, but then I hear these people and like, whoa, my God. Just like, all right, so Zack Wolfe, who was last week's guest.
That's right.
All
Episode 59,
yeah.
Zack Wolfe.
Zack had a spinal cord injury. I mean, he broke his neck in the exact same place as mine.
Yeah.
And, the show last week, it almost got to where we started talking shop.
Right. Comparing, well, that's apples to apples at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's so few people that I can do, I can do that with. Zack, I mean, I am more fortunate than Zack in that I've had more physical return. And
more mobility and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Zack is able to do some things like, I mean, most people that have spinal cord injuries cannot stand up.
Sure.
I mean, they just can't. I mean, you're mostly in a wheelchair the rest of your life.
That's what I imagine the minute I hear spinal cord injury. What I imagine is the worst case scenario is someone like paralyzed from the neck down.
Right. But Zack can actually, and it's so weird because normally once you're going to get back, you get back quickly. I mean, you don't get, it usually you get up there and you plateau and that's it. Well, it's been 11 years and Zack just now started being able to get up from a sitting position, walk, he gets in a walker, he's got leg braces. But I mean, I've seen him on his social media, and here he's walking across the driveway. And
that's a newer show, Perseverance. His big lesson was you've got to be persistent, and you have to have grit, and you just got to keep churning. That 1% a week better is 1% better than you were yesterday.
Yeah. And his episode's so cool too because he got his injury because he got in a truck. They were out partying in the woods, and because they were drinking, that was kind of the cause of it.
And nobody else was really hurt. Only him, and he had this major injury.
Yeah, and he and I've heard him talk on his social media that sometimes you make decisions and they're not good ones, and now this is what you got, and you're gonna have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I remember, and I don't remember what season, but it might have been like the second season, because we record usually after 4 p.m. on weekdays, and you had not a good day, court or in the law firm, something did not go right, and you were like, I'm not even quite sure why I'm doing this today, this interview, and then it was a good interview, and then once you were done with that story, your demeanor had changed. You had you were more peppy, and you said, "Oh, I forget when I hear stories like that. That's why we do this podcast." Like within 35 minutes, you went from "woe is me" and my FML. People can look it up, FML, on Google, see what FML stands for. But you went from FML to, life's pretty darn good, and I got it pretty good, and I enjoy my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I get more inspiration out of this probably than anybody because, I'm either right in front of these people in the studio or we're looking at each other on Zoom.
Yeah.
And you just connect with these people. And, I stay in touch with a lot of them, like our mutual friend Tanner Dees, who was on
the fisherman.
Tanner and I 2-3 weeks ago, it was 3 weeks ago, Tanner and I were 6:30 in the morning. We were on the beach at Dauphin Island catching fish together.
Well, I followed Coach JT Burton.
Yeah.
Tusculum.
Tusculum.
I followed them on Twitter and stuff and watched their basketball season. They made it to the quarterfinals of their league. And, it was nice because, I'm not a huge sports fan, but I had a connection to this small college, in basketball. And I don't say I watched the game, but I made sure to look at their record, and followed him on Twitter. And he had a darn good season.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's another, you get to follow these people. They've got lives going on.
Well, Dr. Albert Russell and I have started a Facebook friendship. We usually high five each other or give each other some acclamation usually once a week, and he's a great guy. And I met him through the show, through your show as well.
Right, Dr. Albert Russell. His was the kind of the tough beginnings growing up in Mobile, and he's the head of chemistry, the head of the Department of Chemistry at Tuskegee. And so, I keep up with him on Facebook too, and he posts it. He works out every morning in his garage.
That's
and
when
posts
I see him.
it.
And he has a great collection of T-shirts, which I'm always commenting on how great his T-shirts are.
Well, another thing we're going to have to do. I've got a Rocket Motivation T-shirt to send him because they're not ready to go out yet, but soon.
Yeah.
We're going to be selling the old Rocket Motivation T-shirts, and we'll get one. I'm certainly going to get one to Dr. Russell.
Merchandising. It's always the phase 5 of a podcasting schedule. So I'll tell you what, let's we need to go ahead and wrap up. We're over our time here. So what can the folks look forward in the future? What kind of shows are we looking for? Are we doing with Rocket Motivation coming up?
Well, I mean, they just got to be shows about motivation and inspiration. And factually, after you do 60 shows, we're always looking for different factual scenarios. But it gets tough. It's not that we repeat that much, but sometimes it's hard to find new guests. But we always do, and we will. My goal is to continue bringing top-level guests who have incredible stories and who want to tell them, who will dig deep and not be reserved, and they just give their story.
Right.
And what we want to do is we want to keep doing those, and we just want to get bigger. We want to grow. I want just more ears on our podcasts.
I've been thinking about categories, and one thing we haven't covered a lot is addiction, as in gambling. We've done some drug stuff, and we've done some alcohol stuff, which is so prevalent. But gambling addiction, we know that's a major problem throughout all of our lives. We scratch the surface of mental illness. And I'm not talking about the Sybil multiple personality type, but just dealing with depression, even like extreme ADHD. I have extreme ADHD. I could tell you some things that I did not know that got in the way of my life. Thank gosh I found the right person after the fact to help me with it. But we've barely scratched the surface of the brain. And then the other thing is business. We really have not. And there's a lot of I call it failure porn, meaning there's a lot of things out there that will tell you that instead of talking about your successes, you talk about how your failures brought you to success. But there is a lot of inspiration and a lot of lessons people have learned from. They made a calculated risk, not just saying a risky risk, a calculated risk. It didn't go their way, but somewhere along the way that also was better for their company. That pivot made them stronger down the road. And that is stuff that I need to hear. We all need to hear in our lives when you do everything right, and the government makes a rule that changes, or, we get some strange virus, which was only in movies until this last couple years of our lives. But to see people grab the bull by the horns, not freak out, get upset for a little while, and then pivot and then find something that made their company stronger, just that is the stuff that really makes me stand up and listen and makes me realize giving up just is not an option right now.
And the only one I think we've got is from Gat Creek, and his story was awesome about the Chinese dumping the wood furniture in the U.S., which he had just borrowed a bunch of money for an expansion, and then all of a sudden the bottom dropped out. And like, oh gosh, now what are we going to do?
Well, we're going to end the show like you put everybody else on notice by putting all the pressure of saying, we've had a great interview. Now leave us something with one more thing to inspire us for the last shot.
Yeah, the parting shot.
The parting shot. So, Rod, what is your parting shot to leave us with?
Well, my parting shot is we've only got one life. I mean, this is it. And you got to make the best of it. And things are going to be tough. I mean, I guess some people get smooth sailing lives. I guess everybody doesn't have to go through adversity, but this is it. And, you can't allow something just to knock you off the tracks where you can't get back on them.
Yeah.
So sit back and think about, what do you want out of your life? Like I said, this is it. And this is one thing Zack Wolfe said last week is, first of all, life has got to be fun. It can't be a constant ass whip. You got to have some fun in life, but think about it. You don't get a do-over. And so think about what you want to do. What do you want out of your life? I mean, like, I'm a lawyer. That's the main thing I do. But I've written a book about my life, and now I'm podcasting. I do some oil painting. I mean, it's like, get something out of life. Don't your life be, man, I watch some great stuff on Netflix, and man, it's really good. Well, that's good. And I like Netflix too. I like to sit on the couch every once in a while, or probably more than I should, and watch that. But don't be a spectator. Right. Life is a participation sport, and you got to get in.
Yeah, and I agree. My big thing is be more active, less passive, and try newer things. And look, when I see people who have been put in a situation where they shouldn't be, like mountain climbing and mountain biking because of limitations with their body, and they still do it, then it also shows me, Johnny, you have no excuse sitting your rear end on a couch watching wonderful, bingeful TV. Get your butt up and go live life. And I totally agree. Life is short, and it's meant to be lived. And I think Rocket Motivation is a really good show in teaching the world that whatever your situation is, that life is worth living and it needs to be lived, and it's rich. It's a rich, rich world out there. All right, so Rod, it's time for us to end the show, and I just want to say that the listeners have been so great. The show has grown over the seasons. We are wrapping up season 5. We'll take a short break. We will regroup and find new guests, but I want to thank you so much for you trusting me and working on the show, and also thanks again for doing this episode of a recap, because we have not recapped 5 seasons of Rocket Motivation.
Yeah, and this was a good time for it, and I want to thank you, Johnny, because without you, it doesn't work. I don't think people that may want to get into podcasting realize. I mean, if you want to put out a good show, I mean, I think some people can do it in their basement.
You can,
but they're technologically savvy. But if somebody wants to do a podcast who's not that, you know, I mean, this thing wouldn't happen without you. All the editing, you know, the website. I mean, everything you do. It's just I want to thank you so much for it, because without you, we wouldn't be here.
Well, I appreciate it. It's a great collaboration. You know, I get to work with my clients because they're the host, and I worked in advertising for 20 plus years. And I can say that none of the projects that I worked on had that understanding of what goes into creating something from nothing. And when you have a host that's also your client, it's great to work together with them, because the people behind the mic make the show. I might make the show, as in produce it, but the person who makes the show work is the person who's behind the mic, who's enthusiastic what they're doing, cares about what they're doing, takes time to pre-interview and does the work. And so it is fun to collaborate on this stuff. And so thanks again. And again, the listeners, there is no reason for us to do this show without listeners. And so you guys are the biggest heroes of all. And thank you for everything since day one for Rocket Motivation.
All right. And we'll be back with season 6 in a month or two.
Sooner than we probably want it to be, because next thing we know, we'll take a break. And next thing you know, it's like, oh my gosh, we have to get that first guest.
Yeah, it's coming up though. All right. Thanks, Johnny. Thanks again for listening to Rocket Motivation. I want to again thank our sponsor, Christy McCullough, and her firm, Empowered Family Law. Listeners in the Mobile County, Alabama area, get in touch with Chrissy and Empowered Family Law for all your family law issues and needs. If you would like to get my book, Get Back Up, it's available at Amazon. Just put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Cade, and the book will pop up. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe to Rocket Motivation wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please rate and review the shows and spread the word about Rocket Motivation to your friends. So until next time, remember, never give up and always get back up.